Hello everyone, and welcome to the Syncfusion webinar, Maximizing Flexibility with Azure and the Syncfusion Dashboard and Big Data Platforms. My name is Carter Harris. I'm the Video Marketing Specialist at Syncfusion and your moderator for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Aaron Melamed, a Product Solutions Specialist here at Syncfusion. If you have any questions, you can enter them into the question box on the right side of the screen at any time. We'll answer the questions at the end of the session and also post the entire Q&A on our blog. We are recording this webinar and will share the link in the next few days. All registrants will receive an email with the link. This and previous webinars will also be available on our YouTube channel. Now, before we begin, I'd like to briefly tell you a bit about Syncfusion. Syncfusion delivers an extensive range of over 800 web, mobile, and desktop controls. We also empower businesses to get the most out of their data with our enterprise solutions, including the dashboard and big data platforms. We have been in business for over 15 years and are headquartered in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina in the U.S. Syncfusion has more than 12,000 customers, including large financial institutions, Fortune 100 companies, and global IT consultancies. More than 1 million users from 125 countries trust Syncfusion in their development process. Now that you get to know a bit more about us, I'll hand this over to Aaron to get started.
All right, thank you, Carter. On today's agenda, we're going to start by going into a brief introduction to Azure. So we're going to talk a little bit about what Azure is, how it fits into today's business needs, and how Syncfusion fits into the overall picture of Azure. From there, we'll move on to the main demo portion of the webinar, where we'll first start by looking into setting up the Syncfusion dashboard server in Azure. And then from there, we'll move on into setting up the Syncfusion Big Data Platform in Azure as well. After that, I'll hand it back over to Carter so we can go over some of our licensing options, and then we'll move on into our Q&A session. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So, today's leading companies are measuring performance in more and new ways to gain sustainable competitive advantages. As more operating units use data to optimize their efficiency and effectiveness, it eventually becomes apparent that greater value can be driven from combining internal data sets such as from marketing, sales, customer service, and finance. Many companies are also using external data to learn more about their target markets, competitors, and customers. Using combined data sets, businesses are able to understand more about their customers and operations, improve ROI, and deliver new forms of value. The sheer amount of data that needs to be managed and analyzed continues to grow exponentially, which is forcing businesses to move beyond their own data centers into the cloud. It is no longer economically or practically feasible to store and process all data on premises over the long term. DevOps teams are embracing the cloud to achieve greater levels of agility, scalability, and application stability. Meanwhile, developers are building analytics into all kinds of software to better understand the performance and value. Almost every type of software now includes some sort of analytics for the benefit of developers, end users, or both. As more software moves to the cloud and as enterprise data volumes continue to grow, it only makes sense that application-specific analytics and enterprise analytics are best executed in the cloud. The Syncfusion Big Data Platform, Syncfusion Dashboard Platform, and Microsoft Azure enable enterprises, enterprise developers, and ISVs to harness the power of the cloud while maintaining full control of data processing and dashboarding. In addition, with Syncfusion's flat-free licensing structure, developers can scale their applications limitlessly without incurring additional licensing costs. So why Azure? Microsoft Azure is the logical infrastructure as a service choice for the vast number of enterprise application developers already familiar with the Microsoft ecosystem. Azure is a multi-level infrastructure as a service and platform as a service designed for the needs of modern enterprises. With it, businesses can take advantage of elastic compute, storage, and network capabilities on demand and at competitive prices. Azure also provides database as a service, message queuing as a service, and much more. In fact, Azure is a growing collection of integrated cloud services that developers and IT professionals use to build, deploy, and manage applications through Microsoft's global network of data centers. With Azure, developers can build and deploy software using the tools, applications, and frameworks of choice. So, while Microsoft provides an array of tools for Azure, the company also welcomes and actively encourages enhancements made possible by its partners such as Syncfusion. As a Microsoft Visual Studio industry partner, Syncfusion's job is to provide value-added solutions. To us, value-added means proven components and frameworks, better developer productivity than is possible natively, ease of use, and unmatched customization capabilities. So, what does Syncfusion have to offer? To start, point-and-click simplicity. Syncfusion's big data and dashboard platforms are one-click simple to deploy on Azure, so developers don't have to worry about infrastructure details such as virtual machines and the configuration. We're also fully customizable. Syncfusion's big data and dashboard platforms provide unparalleled customization capabilities so developers can have complete end-to-end control of their application's big data and dashboarding capabilities. Backed by the stability and scalability of Azure, developers benefit from fine-grained customization capabilities right down to the widget level. We also offer complete flexibility. Syncfusion's big data and dashboard platforms provide greater flexibility than other alternatives. An entire IDE that is purpose-built for working with big data is included with the Syncfusion Big Data Platform. Developers can simply choose to connect with the local cluster on their desktop or an Azure cluster to simply by clicking on one of the two options. We're also pluggable. Syncfusion's extension model enables developers to use the custom dashboard components and custom widgets Syncfusion builds in their environments. The widgets behave like platform-native widgets. We also offer use-specific configurability. Developers can create customized dashboard platforms that suit a specific need, whether that's company-specific, industry-specific, or department-specific. These capabilities are ideal for developers who want greater API-level access than HD Insight provides. We also offer simple flat-fee licensing. When developers want to deploy their application to the cloud for scalability, they have to consider the licensing ramifications. Syncfusion's licensing model is completely scale-free, so scale does not matter. Developers can deploy their applications on-premises or in the cloud without the hassle, cost, and potential risks of complicated licensing models. There are no per-user, per-developer, or per-server costs. And finally, Syncfusion understands Azure. Syncfusion has had hands-on experience with Azure as a user and a Microsoft VSIP. As a Microsoft partner for over 15 years, we truly understand the Microsoft ecosystem and Azure. All right, so let's move into the demo portion of today's webinar. So on the screen right now is the Azure portal dashboard. So this is the main page that you'll see when you first log into your Azure portal. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to start by setting up the dashboard server. And to do that, there's two ways you can get there. So essentially, you want to go to the Azure Marketplace. On the homepage here, you'll find a quick shortcut that takes you directly to the Marketplace. And you can also click on this New button in the top left of the Azure sidebar here. So I'm going to go ahead and click New. And that brings us into the Azure Marketplace. So in the search bar, I'm simply going to search for Syncfusion. And now, although today's webinar is focusing on just the dashboard server and our big data platform, you can see that we have other products available on Azure as well. So like I said before, we are going to be starting with the dashboard server, so I'll select that and then go ahead and click Create. So the first step to setting up an Azure VM with the dashboard server is to set up the actual basic settings of the VM itself. So you start by giving it a name. So I'll call this one Dashboard Test. From there you choose your disk type, which will stick with SSD as default. Provide a username for that VM. Provide a password. Choose your subscription. And then if you're using, and then you need to choose your resource group. You can either use an existing one or create a new one. In this case, I'll just go ahead and create a new one and call it the same as my actual VM. And then lastly, you need to choose your location. So this will depend on where you're actually located, physically located. This will typically automatically configure itself to your current location, but if you do need to set it up for a different area of the world, you can do so very easily. So we'll go ahead and approve all that and click OK. And now the next step of the setup process is where we actually choose our blade size, our virtual machine size. For the dashboard server, we don't actually need a whole lot of resources to power this. So we're going to skip over the recommended blade sizes, click on View All, and then we'll find one of the smaller ones to use for the dashboard server. All right, so we'll just give Azure here a minute to respond. There we go. Now for the dashboard server, like I said, we don't need a whole lot, so we're going to come down to one of these smaller blades. Here we go. So we're actually going to be using the B1MS standard blade. So this provides us with one CPU core, 2 gigabytes of RAM, and 4 gigs of storage. Now, these are essentially the minimum specs required for the dashboard server. The minimum specs only actually ask for 1 gigabyte of RAM, but it's better to just kind of go ahead and move up to 2, especially because the price difference isn't that big between the B1S and the B1MS. So we'll select B1MS as our blade. We'll move on to the next step. Now here we're asked to configure some optional features for our VM. For Syncfusion, we don't require any of these, so we can go ahead and remove managed disks. We also do not need boot diagnostics, so everything else can essentially stay at its default settings. We don't need to set anything up here or change anything here, so we'll go ahead and click OK. And now this final step, we'll simply run a validation on the settings and choices that we've made to set up this VM. So it'll confirm everything we've set up, everything that we're about to create, and it'll just give us one last chance to look it all over. So at this point, when you click Create, Azure will automatically configure and deploy that virtual machine. Now, in the interest of time, I'm actually not going to click Create here, since it can take several minutes for a VM to fully deploy. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to connect to an existing VM that I've previously configured. So you can see here we have a dashboard VM that's already running. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to that. And so whenever you connect to whenever you deploy a dashboard, there's actually a dashboard or a virtual machine dashboard that goes along with each one. And so I'm actually going to pull up a quick screenshot here to show that. So here you can see that when you click on a deployed virtual machine, this is the dashboard that you'll see. So you'll see some controls for starting, stopping, and restarting the virtual machine. You'll see some of the settings for it. And you'll also get some metrics down here that will show you things like your CPU usage, network usage, storage usage, and so on. Now, in the case of our dashboard VM, or any VM for that matter, when you first deploy it, it automatically deploys as a started VM. So you don't need to connect to you don't need to go to your dashboard and manually click start. It's already been started for you. So the only thing you need to do once your VM is deployed is simply click on connect. And so that will allow you to download an RDP file, which will essentially allow you to create a remote desktop connection with that virtual machine. So I've actually already clicked on that, and it brings up the remote desktop connection window here. So I'll go ahead and click connect. And then that brings up the Windows Security login box here. In this case, I'm not logging in with this account. I'm going to be using the one I actually created for that VM. So I will type in that username, and then I'll also type in the password that goes along with that. Now, before I actually completely connect here, this is a virtual machine that I deployed earlier before the start of this session, and I have never connected to it before because I wanted to preserve that first run experience so that we could go over that on this webinar. So this is the first time I'm logging into this virtual machine, so I'll go ahead and establish that connection. Now I'll bring this over to this screen here. So what we're going to see is we're going to see the first run experience of this virtual machine. So while we're logging in, the virtual machine will start to configure itself. So it will automatically log in as that user. It'll set up my desktop. It'll actually start to run the server manager automatically, and then from there we'll be able to get started. And so here we have the server manager dashboard. And we'll actually minimize this for now. We'll come back to this later. So when you first deploy your Syncfusion dashboard server, The server itself is not running. So the virtual machine is, but the Syncfusion dashboard server is not. So in order to get that to run, you simply need to click on the Start Syncfusion Dashboard Server link that is already included for you on the desktop. So just double click on that, and that will start up the Syncfusion Dashboard Server. So once it spins up, you'll see that it brings up your default internet browser, which in this case on this new virtual machine is going to be Internet Explorer. And once that comes up, we'll then be able to go through the first time setup process for the dashboard server. And here we go. So I will not use recommended settings. All right. So the first thing that the dashboard server asks of us is to select or create a database for the dashboard server. So the dashboard server includes features such as user management. It allows you to store dashboards. It allows you to save data sources for those dashboards. You'll have configuration settings and so on. So you'll need a database in order to have the dashboard server function correctly. And you have a couple of options here. So we can connect to an existing SQL Server database. So if you choose SQL Server, for example, you can create a new database altogether, or choose an existing one, and then you can choose your prefixes for the tables that will be created later on. And the same thing applies to Oracle, MySQL, and PostgreSQL, as you can see here. So we have support for all of these out of the box. And again, you can use an existing or create a new database on your current database server. For the purposes of this demo, I'm actually going to stick with the default setting here in the embedded SQL CE, as this will also provide us with sample data that we can look at. So it will automatically install some sample dashboards, sample data sources, as well as some sample widgets. Now, the next step will ask us to choose our storage system for the dashboard files. I'm going to stick with standard file storage, but you can see here we do also support Azure Blob Storage. So I'll just click Proceed. And then finally, it's asking me to create my default user for the dashboard server. And so I'm going to go ahead and fill in those details. And this first field is the username field, and it does support spaces, so I will just use my name as such. And what I'm doing right now is I am creating essentially the admin user for the dashboard server. All right. All right. So now, when you click Proceed at this step, it will actually go through and create all the database tables that are necessary. In our case, because I chose the sample database, it will also populate it with the sample dashboards and data sources and so on. So while that is happening, I'm actually going to come back to my Azure portal, and I'm actually going to start to set up something that it'll become useful in just a second. So one of the things you can do when you access your virtual machine dashboard is you can configure a DNS name. So if you wanted to make your virtual machine accessible to the public, so accessible via the internet, one of the ways you can do that is by creating a host name. And so if you click on the configure link here underneath DNS name, it'll pop out this side panel here, which will allow you to create that DNS name label. So in this case, because I chose the Eastern US location for my Azure VM, the domain that I'm going to be using is whatever label I come up with, .eastus.cloudapp.azure.com. Now, if you wanted to use your own existing domain or create a new domain that's personal to you, you can also use Azure DNS Services. So there's a link right there that allows you to quickly start a free trial of Azure DNS Services and go ahead and get started with that. So in my case, I've gone ahead and created this already. So I already have a DNS name for my dashboard server, so for my VM, and I'll be using that in just a second. So let's go ahead and go back to that VM and see where it's at. So the configuration is done, so I'm going to go ahead and log in to that server. And you can see off to the side that we do also support Windows authentication as well as Azure Active Directory. So you can actually set up multiple login providers there as well. So now we're logging into the dashboard server for the first time. Now, whenever you download the or set up the Syncfusion dashboard server on Azure, you actually are also needing to, there are also some other components to the dashboard platform in general that you would also have access to. They're not part of the Azure deployment by default. One of them being the Syncfusion Dashboard Designer, which is what you actually use to create the dashboards that are ultimately displayed and published onto the dashboard server. And so we'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, I just want to show that this is a complete dashboard solution. So it's essentially ready to go out of the box. So there's really nothing else that you need to do in order to make this a usable or workable product. So you can go ahead and deploy this. You can see how simple it was to do that. And once you've deployed it, you have a complete dashboard server solution that's ready to be used in production, essentially. So the only things you might want to do in order to make it production ready might be to, for example, remove or change the Syncfusion branding if you'd like. And that is something you can easily do through the settings of the dashboard server. So as an admin, you have complete control over the look and feel of the dashboard server. And as a developer, you can also, of course, reskin the dashboard server however you'd like. And so here we have a dashboard loading up. Take a quick look at that. It seems like some of the services might still be spinning up in the background, causing it to slow down a bit. But here you can see that the dashboard is loaded, so it's all there. And you have access to all the features of the dashboard server at this point. So you have the ability to export these to various formats, including image, PDF, and Excel. You have the ability to link to these. You can also have comments inside of these dashboards, so you can have conversations for each dashboard that's hosted here. Now, as I mentioned, you do have the ability to reskin or rebrand the Syncfusion server, dashboard server. So here you can go into the settings menu, and from there, you'll find the options for removing the Syncfusion logo, all the Syncfusion branding. You can see here it's very easy to do that. We even have toggle switches for things like the powered by and copyright information along the bottom of the dashboard server as well. So that's pretty much it. So now we've established a database, or sorry, we've created a dashboard server. And now the next thing we might want to do is make it public. Let's make it live. So let me show you how to do that. And this is actually pretty simple. So I'm going to go back now to the server manager that we minimized earlier. And from here, let me make this a little bit bigger. From here, I'm going to go to the Tools section in the top right, and then go down to my IIS manager, the Internet Information Services Manager. So I'm going to pull this up. Now here, I'm going to go down and look through the application tree here on the left side and find my Syncfusion dashboard website, and here it is. Now, when I select that, on the right side, under Edit Site, I'm going to click on Bindings, and I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to add a binding, select my IP address, and then here under hostname, I'm going to provide that DNS name that I created earlier that I was mentioning via the screenshot. So I've already created it, so I'm going to go ahead and paste in the one that I created earlier. So there you go. So it's dashboard1.ecus.cloudapp.azure.com. So now when I click OK, I'm going to set that up, and it's ready to go. That's all I need to do. So now I can minimize my remote server, or sorry, my VM, just to show that this is now completely live. So here's the VM, and here is my actual browser. So let's go into a new tab, and let's paste in that URL. Now let's see where it takes us. And there we go. So now you can see the Syncfusion dashboard server is in fact live. I am able to reach the login screen. So let me go ahead and log in again. Since this is a new connection that does not remember my login, since I am now logging in through my local machine. And so now that we're in, everything is essentially the same. So you have the same access to, of course, all the different dashboards that we just saw earlier, the different data sources, the settings menu, it's all here. Now one thing to note, however, is when you first set your bindings and you make the dashboard server live, you'll run into this. I'm going to choose a dashboard, I'm going to wait for it to load up here. And then what we should see is an error message. So you'll notice at the top here we have an error message that says the dashboard service cannot be contacted. And that's actually expected in this case. And so the reason this happens is because the dashboard server is still trying to connect to that local host. And so this is an easy fix. So whenever you first make the dashboard server live, like we just did, what you want to do is go into the settings for the dashboard server. And notice that I'm doing this on my actual local machine as opposed to in the VM itself. It doesn't really matter where you do this. But here you can see the site URL is still pointing to localhost. So what I'll do here is I'll replace that with the actual URL that we created earlier that we pointed this to, and then go ahead and save those changes. All right, and that's it. So now we go back to that dashboard page, and let's try to load up that same dashboard. And there we go. So now you can see it starting to populate. Now this particular dashboard is actually 3 separate dashboards that are linked together. So we have a multi-tab dashboard in this particular instance. So in addition to some of the features I mentioned earlier, you also have the ability to do things like create schedules, to send out emails automatically containing a copy of the dashboard at a particular point in time. You have the ability to set up an email server so you can actually manage those email features such as scheduling, as well as comment notifications and other things. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of the other components of the dashboard platform is its designer. And so let's actually talk about that real quick. So let me bring that up. So here is the dashboard designer. Now this is running on my local machine. This is not currently loaded onto the virtual machine. And so like I said before, this is what you would use to actually create a new dashboard. This is a completely drag and drop interface. You have all your widgets available on the left and all the other informational boxes on the right, such as the ability to import data sources or create a new data source connection and so on. And so the dashboard designer here has a great integration with the dashboard server when you're dealing with remote servers. So here there on the left side you have a Server Explorer tab, which allows you to connect to multiple dashboard servers. I'm getting this error since I'm not currently running my default local dashboard server, which as you can actually see, there's one of them right there. And so the way this works is whenever you first load up the dashboard designer, you're going to want to click on this person icon on the top right, which will allow you to log in. And so in this case, I'm going to create a new user login, which as you can see will simply ask me for the server URL for my dashboard server. It will establish that connection, and then from there I can log in as that user or any user that has been created on that dashboard server. So I'm going to go ahead and click login. It's going to connect to that dashboard, and I'll go ahead and say yes here since I've done this before. And now you can see in the top right that I am logged in. You can see my user information up there. You can see which dashboard server I'm currently connected to. We can also now access the server tab, which allows us to publish a dashboard directly to that dashboard server or any of the other dashboard servers that we've established a connection to. And because there is the ability to set up permissions for each of your users, you can also set up which categories or which folders users can upload dashboards to. And then same thing with data sources. So you have the ability to manually create a new data source connection. So clicking the little plus sign here gives you access to all the different data sources we can connect to. But in addition to that, we also have the ability to import data sources or existing data sources. And those can be brought in from the dashboard server. So again, if a user has permissions to see specific data sources, they will see those here. And once in this view, they can go ahead and select whichever data sources they want. There's no limit here on how many they can select or import for any given dashboard, so you can select multiple, go ahead and import them all, and then continue to work on that dashboard. All right, so you can see those there. And if you double click on any of those data sources, you'll be able to go into your data source designer and pull out a particular data set that you would like to work with any of those dashboards. All right, now without getting too further into it, that's pretty much all you need to do and all you need to know about setting up the dashboard server in Azure. As you can see, it was a very quick and very simple process. We do actually have another webinar that we've done previously that focuses specifically on the dashboard. So if you are interested in learning more about what the dashboard designer and dashboard server can do, I would highly recommend checking out the Syncfusion website and looking at our previous dashboard webinar. So now let's go ahead and go back and go ahead and close this out. Let's go back to Azure. And now let's talk about setting up the big data platform in Azure. So to do this, it's exactly the same process as before. Instead of clicking new, this time I'm going to click on Marketplace just to show that it is the same. So the layout's slightly different, but it's the same. You have the same features essentially. So I'm going to search for Syncfusion again. And instead of doing the big data platform, we're actually going to do the big data platform sandbox. So I'm going to select the sandbox. And the reason I'm using the sandbox here is because for the same reason that I did the embedded SQL CE database for the dashboard server. The sandbox simply includes some sample data as well as some sample scripts that we can play with. And so as you can see, the process here is exactly the same as before. So I'm just going to call this big data test 1. We're going to leave it with the SSD. Again, we're going to create the username just like we did before. Same thing with the password. All right. And again, I can either use an existing user group or a resource group or create a new one, and I'm going to create a new one. So big data, see if it'll take that. Good enough. Same thing with location as before. So we'll go ahead and click OK. And now there is a difference here when we go to our virtual machine size. And when it comes to big data, you do need more resources in order to comfortably work with big data in general. So these recommended options are actually pretty good as far as what we need. Now, the D11 standard is a good one to start with, but we're actually going to use a different one. So we actually at Syncfusion recommend that we use a different blade size. We actually recommend the DS11 V2. That's kind of the minimum. So we'll come down to that one. So you can see here, the DS11 V2 gives you 2 CPU cores, 14 gigs of RAM, and in this case, 28 gigs of storage. Now, when you're dealing with big data, RAM is going to be one of your biggest needs in terms of resources. So that's what you want to make sure you have enough of, is enough RAM to actually process and work with all the data that you'll be working with when dealing with big data platforms. So we'll use the DS11 V2 standard, select that. And just like before, we get to configure our optional features. And again, like before, we don't need any of the ones that are turned on by default, but you can keep them if you like. So there's really no changes that need to be made here, but in our case, we'll just go ahead and turn off manage this and boot diagnostics. Again, we'll go through the validation process, and once that finishes, then we'll be able to create our new VM. And so again, I'm not going to go ahead and click create because now with a bigger VM and big data, this can also take several minutes to deploy. And of course, I have already done that. So I'll go ahead and connect to this VM on my other screen here and bring it up. So let me go ahead and cancel this. And so just like before, you also get a VM dashboard, just like you did with a dashboard server, and it looks the same. So you have your start, your stop and reconnect, or connect and restart options. You'll have the same DNS name features, and everything else is identical. The only difference, of course, being the blade size and the image that we used to create that VM. And so if we come back here, you can see that the remote desktop connection is going to be the same. So it's the login screen, and I'll go ahead and use my other account. Here we go. All right, so now we're logging into a newly restarted big data platform VM. Now, one thing that's different, as you can see right now, is that unlike with the dashboard server, when you deploy with the big data platform, it does automatically start when the VM starts. So when you log in, you'll see that the big data platform itself will start to spin up. All the services will spin up automatically, and it will also launch you into Big Data Studio, which is what is loading right now. And so now we are in the Big Data Studio and we are connected to our essentially our pseudo cluster running on this VM. And so you have some, you can see here if you click on properties, you can see that we're running, that everything is up and running. You can see various stats on this cluster. Now, in the Syncfusion Big Data Platform, one of the main items here that you'll primarily be working with is going to be this, the Big Data Studio. This is what you would use to interactively work with Hadoop, with the Hadoop distributed file system, HDFS. There's an HDFS file viewer, which lets you view text content inside the file system. You can easily prepare and manage scoop jobs. You have the ability, you have an interactive shell for Hadoop, for Pig, for Hive, HBase, and Spark. So you can see all those here. You also have the ability to manage Hadoop commands and save them for later use. You can run Pig, Hive, Spark, Scala, Python, and Spark SQL, and HBase scripts and save them for later use as well. You can also do, you can view results in a grid or plain text in Pig, Hive, and HBase. A lot of different things are included here. Excuse me, included here. And so you can see right away that in this sandbox example, we have several sample scripts which you can find here on the kind of file explorer off to the right, or the solution explorer, if you will. So you can see different types of scripts that we have. So for example, if we click on this basic one, you can see that here in the editor, we have the ability to easily run an entire script or just a selection of it. So I'll click Run Selection on this, and then we'll be able to get some information back based on this command. And same thing for other types of commands. So I'm going to let's look at the last kilobyte of this particular file. Easy enough. And it's also easy enough to, of course, modify this. And anytime you make any changes to these script files, the editor will keep track of that. And if you try to exit, it will ask you if you would like to save those changes so that your work is always saved. So we fix that. And now let's look at the last kilobyte of this particular file. And there you can see, easy enough to work with. And so even though we provide a GUI interface for interacting with Hadoop, you still have the ability to use the CLI if you'd like. So you still have access to PowerShell and Command Shell. So if you would like to use the command line interface, you still have access to that. The main thing to be aware of with the Big Data platform and Syncfusion is that this is now a Windows-based interface for working with Hadoop. And so one of the other kind of big components here of the Big Data platform is going to be the cluster manager. So let me minimize this for now, as well as the server manager. And now the link that you see here, the shortcut you see here on the desktop, this actually is to bring up the Syncfusion Big Data dashboard. Got a lot of dashboards going on today. And so here you can see that we can access the studio if you close it down and want to access it again. You can also access the cluster manager, and I'll go ahead and launch into that. And then also you can see here all the different samples that we have access to with our Big Data Studio or Big Data Platform. So the cluster manager is a web-based interface. And here you can see, once it loads up, that there is a default user. You can see the username and the password are the same. It's just admin. And of course, you can change that once you get in. And so the cluster manager here, what this lets you do is essentially lets you monitor what your clusters are doing. So in this case, because we went with the sandbox, we have a pseudo node cluster. So we have a just kind of a development edition cluster here that's running on this virtual machine. It's not distributed across multiple machines like a typical Hadoop cluster would be. However, you can still get a sense for what you would get here. So for all the different clusters that you're currently connected to, this will show you a list of those. And then once you're in a particular cluster, you can start to monitor what it's doing. So you can see its utilization, CPU, RAM, storage, and so on. You can also see what jobs it's currently running. So if you've assigned it some scripts to run and you've queued up some jobs, you can see here the job queue and what's going on with each one, and so on. You can also go into administration and set up different configuration settings for your various clusters. One thing that's not shown here that you would see if you were connecting to a new Azure cluster is there would be an Azure button up here in the top right that will allow you to connect to an Azure cluster, either to create a new one or to connect to an existing one. And then from there, you would be able to manage everything you need from right from here. And so again, that is pretty much it. So getting started with a big data platform in Azure is incredibly simple. As you can see, as you saw, it was just simply selecting the template, the Syncfusion Big Data Platform sandbox template from the Azure portal, setting up your correct blade size, something that's appropriate for big data, and then simply logging into the deployed VM, which already runs everything automatically for you. You simply start, connect to the VM, and you can just start working with big data right away. So again, the main thing to remember here is when you combine the power of Syncfusion with the flexibility of Azure, you end up with a scalable and efficient answer to all of your customers' needs. One thing I wanted to talk about before I hand it back over to Carter to talk about our licensing options is the Syncfusion Data Integration Platform. As I mentioned earlier, there are other platforms, other solutions that Syncfusion offers that we didn't have a chance to talk about today, and the Data Integration Platform is one of them. And so what this is, or what it provides, is an intuitive interface for integrating and transforming data from various sources into analytics-ready data for data warehousing, creating reports and dashboards, and for business intelligence analysis purposes. And so it also provides various different connections to different sources. So you have connections for JDBC, so SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, and so on, REST APIs, social feeds such as Twitter, Google Analytics, and so on. We can connect to Amazon, so AWS, NoSQL, Cassandra, Mongo, and so on. Various different file formats such as JSON, XML, CSV. You can even pull attachments from emails. And of course, we can also connect to big data. And so what this all means is that using the data integration platform, you can easily integrate that into a workflow that also includes the Syncfusion dashboard platform, the big data platform, our report platform, which we didn't get to talk about today, and everything else. What you ultimately have is an extensible, highly configurable, drag and drop, simple to use interface for an ETL tool. So this is a very powerful ETL tool. And as you can see here, you do have the ability to extend it by writing custom processes in case you need to connect to some other data source that we don't already include in our over 220 existing processors, or if you need to perform some other transformation operation that isn't included in those as is. All right, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and transfer controls back over to Carter so we can go over some of our licensing options, and then we will go into our Q&A session.
All right, everyone. So before moving on to the questions, let me also mention our community license. For smaller companies with revenue under $1 million US, all Syncfusion products are available for free. That includes all the controls in the Essential Studio as well as our enterprise solutions. We have plenty of customers who have built up their businesses starting with our community license. For those of you who do not qualify for community license, let me introduce you to our global flat licensing. We offer 4 tiers of pricing tied to the size of your organization starting at $3,995. Our global flat license eliminates compliance and licensing headaches by making sure everyone who needs a license has one, including third parties and contractors. As your team grows, you can focus on your projects instead of worrying about headcount. There are no surprise fees with a global license. If you'd like to learn more information, please visit us at syncfusion.com. As it's time to end the session, thank you all for joining us today, and thanks Aaron again for presenting, and thank you again for your time and interest. See you next time.